morning, Mary Priniski.
Good morning, Kay.
And welcome on this eve of Halloween.
Yes.
Do you like Halloween?
Yeah, it's fine.
Did you like it as a kid?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, we all did the trick-or-treating number.
Right.
I went to St. Pat's School in Escanaba, which
Yeah.
was Dominican, Adrian Dominican. That's how I met our nuns. And every year we would have a school program of some kind on St. Patrick's Day, and we would do whatever costume there was for the program. One year we did something like we had to get dressed up in the gowns, graduation gowns and caps, and so that was my Halloween costume.
Oh.
So every Halloween we wore the costume from the previous year's St. Patrick's Day program.
Oh, I see. Well, at least you didn't have to think about what to wear.
We didn't have to, right,
Yeah,
or buy something new.
that's good. Well, I'm sorry you're not going to be here tomorrow because we have a great Halloween party here on campus. It's very nice.
Good.
So, yeah, good.
You get to dress up?
Yeah, I can't say we all are happy about it, but it's a good thing for each department to
Sure.
community spirit. So I'm delighted to be able to interview you, and we've had this on the docket for a couple months. I caught you, and you said you'd stay. So the way we'd like to begin is with the way you began. Where did you begin? Your family, your upbringing, your schooling. What was significant at that time. So maybe if we could begin at that point. And then I'll
Okay.
interject when I want you to go further down.
Okay. So I was born and raised in Escanaba, Michigan, which is in the Upper Peninsula. You know, the thing they say about Michigan, the hands up
Yeah.
from up there. And I was raised with a family. I have there's 7 siblings in my family. I have 5 brothers and 1 sister. We were raised I always say in the woods. We were raised in the country, and people think that means farm,
Right.
but up in the Upper Peninsula it means the woods. So we were about 3 miles outside the city of Escanaba, and lived on Lake Michigan for most of my upbringing.
Wow.
We lived in the lake in the summer and on the lake in the winter, because we all did ice skating, of course. When you're up there, you ice
Yeah.
skate. I belonged to St. Pat's Church and went to St. Pat's grade school, and our sisters staffed that school. So we had of 8 grades, we had 7 sisters.
Wow.
Very different than
No
today.
kidding.
So I was raised with the Adrian Dominicans, and we had Mass every day, of course, before school. I was raised at the time when you fasted from midnight before communion, and so we always brought our breakfast to school. People bring lunch. We brought our breakfast. What else? I'm second oldest, so I babysat a lot, because my youngest brother was born when I was in 2nd grade.
Wow.
So I used to take care of him when I was a kid.
Now, what about high school?
Went to Holy Name High School in Escanaba. That was a combined, we had Adrian Dominicans, Notre Dame Sisters,
Okay.
Franciscan Sisters, and Christian Brothers at the high school.
Oh, that's great.
And we were co-institutional, but not co-educational. So the girls all had classes together and the boys all had classes together, except for some of the sciences where there weren't as many kids in the class, and so we combined the boys and the girls. But for the most part, we were.
Are those schools still there?
Holy Name is still there, but it's a grade school now. They closed the high school in the early 70s.
Yeah.
My brother Mark was in the last class, and now it's now grade school.
You're a singing family, if I
Yes.
recall correctly.
Yes.
What
we
were
are.
some special times in the Priniski family?
Well, not only were we a singing family, we were a playing family. So all of us as kids took piano lessons. I took piano lessons for 12 years in Escanaba from the time I was in 1st grade. And my mother was a pianist, and she also played the cello. My dad sang in barbershop, so they met in the choir.
Okay.
Up in way north in Painesdale, Michigan. So we sang from the time we were little kids, and we still today, there's this song, Tell Me Why, I don't know if you know it, but we learned that when we were kids, and so every time we get together,
nice.
we sing that song at least once during our time. And when my mom was dying and when my dad was dying, we would sing over their bedside, we would do that Tell Me Why. So anyway, but I played the clarinet, my sister played the flute, my brother Pete played the mellophone. My brother Dave played the trumpet. And so we would have these
you could have a band.
We did. We would. My mom would play the piano, and we would all get our instruments out and play together.
What's that, the Von Trapp family? You could have made a movie.
And it's fun because my family's also married into music.
Okay,
So
okay.
my niece plays an oboe. She majored in oboe in college. And her sister, who also does music, married a choral person. And my niece, who's now in Qatar, she has a degree in music education. She married someone who sings. And it just kind of, my nephew married someone who's now a choral conductor at Meredith College in North Carolina. So they just keep coming. We just have a great chorus.
You have a wonderful voice. I know, I just love it when I see you're
Thank
going
you.
to cantor or sing in some way. It's interesting. How come you didn't pursue that further?
That was I changed majors twice when I got here. So I entered in '68.
Okay.
And I started.
Who influenced you relative to entering Adrian? Well, I know the Adrian Dominicans, you had them in grade school.
God.
Oh, God. How unusual. Okay.
Because I had, the people say, well, when did you decide to be a nun? And I said, when I was in 3rd grade. And I never changed my mind. And so that was Sister Ruth Francis, who's Mary Lou Putro. She was my 3rd grade teacher. But I think it was even before then, because I loved the nuns. They were great. You know the story you hear from the Dominicans. It's because of the joy. Yes, it was because of the joy. And then I had a wonderful teacher in 7th grade, Sister Joseph Irene. I don't know, she passed away a good number of years ago now. I don't know if she even ever went back to her baptismal name, if she was still around by then. But she was an amazing teacher and challenged us to do really creative things. She was one of my favorites. So I don't know if there was...
She did a good job with you.
But the sisters were great. The sisters were great. And again, it was when you look at so I went with high school with 3 different congregations, and the Dominicans were the happiest. So why wouldn't I join the Dominicans?
Everyone says that. I guess it's true, huh?
Yeah, must be.
You think it still is, no matter what.
Of
Just
course.
laugh, you fool them all.
True. Keep smiling.
That's what someone just said. Oh, you're always so happy. I says, I've got you fooled. Okay, so then you entered.
Yes.
You entered
Well,
in.
actually, let me tell you the story of my entrance. I graduated from high school in 1967, and I was going to enter in 1967. And on the way to the congregation, I was in a car accident. I was driving, and the car rolled over 7 times. My grandmother was killed.
Oh,
my mother was we were all in the hospital for at least a week. The only 2 that weren't in the accident were 2 of my brothers who were in football, and they stayed back in Escanaba to do football practice.
So who all was in the car?
All of my grandmother, my mom, my dad, all of my siblings except 2 brothers. So we had just crossed the bridge, and we're coming down I-75, and I was driving, and it was a freaky accident. There was a semi, and that we were come out from under an underpass, and there was a gust of wind, and we were in a van, and those vans tend to be kind of iffy in windy days anyway, and so there was a wind came out, and the truck passed, and there's that vacuum that comes.
Right.
So I lost control of the car, and we turned over 7 times. And so my grandmother was killed. My mother was in the hospital for 13 weeks. In those days, they kept you in the hospital. They don't anymore. But she had a dislocated shoulder and some other issues. She never could raise her arm past about this level after that. My dad was in the hospital for 6 weeks. I was in the hospital for 4 weeks because I broke my leg and my wrist. So in order to get on crutches, my wrist had to heal. And then my sister and my oldest brother were only in the hospital for a week. Now again, you have to remember, that was the day where they kept you in the hospital.
But still.
Yeah. So then the next year I entered. So I was a year
But
later.
how did you deal with that tragedy?
Not very well. Not very well. It took me 10 years to talk about it, to even mention it. And then I'd cry. So, but what I was going to say about that. The parish was amazing. The parish women came out and made meals for our family. Because my dad and mom were both in the hospital for 6, my dad for 6 weeks, my mom for 13. So we have these teenagers at home who the parish jumped in and took care of us.
How far away is the bridge from
Escanaba, about 2.5 hours.
Oh, so that was a ways.
So it was a ways. Plus,
Yeah.
in that day, we had the toll on the bridge was like $3.75. Now we're talking 67. $3.75 was a lot of money.
Oh, right.
It was $6.50 round trip. So anybody who came to visit us from Escanaba would have to pay a $6.50 round trip toll on the bridge. So then the next year I entered, and on the way down, my dad made me drive the same road.
God love him.
I know. I didn't like him at the time.
Whose mother?
My dad's mom.
Okay.
Yeah. My mom's mom had died back in the 40s.
And that affected everybody in that van. The accident. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever sat down as a family and talked about it?
Oh, every year my mom, on the anniversary, my mother and I would get on the phone and talk about it. Yeah. And my mom I actually entered the exact day a year later of the accident because it was a leap year. And so the accident was on Friday, the 1st of September, and the entrance day was Sunday, September 1st, a year later. So my anniversary is an anniversary of entrance and the accident.
And then you wonder why.
Oh, yeah. And people say to me, you didn't get the message, did you? God was telling you weren't supposed to be there. So I said, right.
How was I to get to Adrian, though?
Yeah. Nevertheless, she persisted.
Very good, Mary. Very good. No, I did not know that story about you. So then in 1968, you tried again.
Yes.
Traumatic experience driving that way.
Yes.
And then you got to Adrian.
Yes, and I entered with 34 other women, young women. That was the beginning of our chapter of renewal summer.
Oh, okay.
So I entered in September of 68, and then in the spring of 69, the congregation sent us all home. Because it was at that general chapter in 68 that the congregation decided not to take girls right out of high school anymore. Everybody had to be out either 2 years of college or 2 years of working before we were accepted. But they'd already accepted us, so they had to take us. So they sent us home for the summer. I think it was a combination of we were still in the midst of the chapter of renewal.
Okay.
And so this sounds terrible, get rid of us for the summer so that the sisters could continue on with the business of the general chapter, and then also since we were accepted right after high school, to get a little bit more experience before coming back. So there were 35 when I entered. When I came back for reception, there were 12 of us that came back. And some had already left, but there were 12 who came back. So
after that summer.
Yeah. And so there were 12 in the main novitiate at the beginning. There were only 5 of us who made first profession, and I'm the only one who made final profession.
I remember you're coming into Weber. I think you're at Weber at one point or something, and you said, well, I'm going to celebrate Jubilee in the telephone booth, because you were the only one.
The only one in my class, yes.
Yeah.
So this year I celebrated my Jubilee, even though officially I should not celebrate it till next year, because from novitiate, I entered the novitiate in 69.
Right.
But I was supposed to be in the class of 60 that celebrated this year, so the sisters from that class invited me to celebrate with them.
Good.
So my Mary Jane checked with Pat Seaman to see if it would be okay, and so she said yes, and so I celebrated this year.
Okay. So you're legally 25 years in 2019. You're legally 25 years in 2019.
50.
Oh, 50. Pardon me.
50.
I'm still living that accident. Okay, well, congratulations. This is your Jubilee. But you can celebrate for 2 years, can't you?
But that's what I figure.
Yeah. So then you came back and your ministerial life. Now, we can't go through everything, but you have some significant highlights in your ministries.
I
if
have
you'd like
lots of them. No, I started out doing parish ministry. I was at Ford City Catholic Center, which was a non-territorial parish in Chicago. It was right after Vatican II, and so, well, not right after, close to Vatican II. And there was a feeling among a number of folks that some of the parishes weren't moving fast enough. And so Ford City was a shopping center in Chicago. And the man who owned it wanted to have it an all-service shopping center. So he gave space to do a non-territorial parish there. I lived with 2 other sisters, one of ours and Connie Hune, who since has left the congregation, and another congregation sister. We lived in an apartment complex on the property of Ford City, and we got the apartment for free because the guy who owned it wanted to have a full-service shopping center.
Interesting.
And so there were 2 priests and 3 sisters on the team, and I did that for 4 years. And then I did some youth ministry in California for just a year. Did parish work up in the Upper Peninsula for 2 more years, and then I went into the social justice work.
Right.
And so I moved south in 1979. Made finals in 1979 and moved south, and lived in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Did support work for the organizing of the J.P. Stevens plant, which was a textile plant, and that was a major thing in the United States at that time because they were trying to bring all kinds of things into support of workers' rights, including community and church support, which was what I was doing, is to try to engage in getting the churches and broader communities in support of the workers organizing. And then at the same time, there was a civil rights issue in South Carolina in the next town from me where 3 young black men were killed under mysterious circumstances and either ruled stupidly, So somebody is hanging with his hands tied behind his back, and it's ruled a suicide, that kind of thing. And then the last straw was a young man who was killed in a hit-and-run accident on the side in one of the country roads, and there was no investigation. So the community there got together and did some protesting, and we did a march from that small town to the Capitol, and so there were 30-some-odd miles. So what I did there was to do both civil rights and workers' rights and tie the 2 kind of things together. That's what I like to do, is to see the connections between the various issues.
You've always been in ministry on the edge, wouldn't you say?
Not always. Not always. But, it's like...
Many of your ministerial
Many of my
involvement.
ministries, yeah. It's how do you support Catholic teaching in terms of, we have our basis is the dignity of the human person. So when somebody is ruled a suicide with his hanging with his hands tied behind his back, how do you support people who are saying that man had dignity and ought to be treated with respect, and his murder investigated? Or workers who are treated so poorly on the job, they get brown lung, they get in accidents, and so how do you stand up for the dignity of that person? So I think my ministry has always been based on Catholic social teaching, the inherent dignity in human beings, but also the commons, which I think we forget sometimes in our country. We talk about individual rights, but what's the commons, the common good that enables the individual rights to flourish, and that I think sometimes gets lost in
the type of ministry that you were involved with. Was there ever a time that you were fearful of your own life, or because many times people in your position are threatened? Or
I find out about things later.
Oh.
So one time during that time in the early 80s when I was working in South Carolina, I always worked with someone else, usually a laywoman who was just coming out of college, and we kind of teamed up. Well, one time we heard there was going to be a Klan rally near Chester, which is the town that this all stuff was happening in. That was about 20 miles away from where we lived. So we decided we were going to go and look and see what a Klan rally was like. So we went. We didn't stay long. You don't want to hang out there too, because it's a hate group, and so you get a little scared. So we went home, and we found out later that the folks from the community, from the African American community, were going to do something, but they saw us there and they decided not to. So we found out later things. We find out later what some of the things that might have happened that didn't happen. It's that whole thing of remember a while back there was this thing about ministry of presence.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so sometimes just being present can either be a catalyst for something to happen or a damper for something not to happen, depending on the situation. So I also saw myself in Rock Hill as a ministry of presence and
Good.
encouragement, a cheerleader. I'm a cheerleader.
You were also involved in congregational leadership.
Yes, from 2009 until 2015.
Yeah.
We had a chapter prioress who had cancer and passed away. So we had a special election in 2008, and I was elected as chapter prioress for the next 6.5 years. It was great.
It was, I know. It's a wonderful ministry.
It is a wonderful ministry.
Yeah. And you had a big challenge as weren't you involved when you dissolved? I don't want to say dissolved.
No, we brought our chapter to completion.
Completion.
Yes. I was chapter prioress then. And it was a really amazing process because it became very apparent if you paid attention, which is I think one of the things we really need to be doing is paying attention. To numbers make a difference. We can, from the time I was the chapter prioress until we completed the chapter, we always had in the neighborhood of 60 members in the chapter. Towards the end, though, almost a third to a half of those sisters lived in Adrian. I helped move a lot of sisters to Adrian. I also, during my term, we had very few people die in our life as a chapter. So Catherine Clyott, who became, when Mary Beth Beres passed away, Catherine became the interim chapter prioress until we elected. And the only person she ever buried, she was chapter prioress for 6 years, and then she was interim when Mary Beth got so sick. The only person she buried in all those 7 years that she did that work was Mary Beth. I buried 8.
Wow.
And also, I moved a lot of people up to Adrian because of health reasons. And so when just looking at the numbers and looking at where we were, it became very apparent. So what we did as a mission council was talked about what we saw the future being, and then laid that out for the sisters. And we voted at a chapter assembly unanimously to complete the chapter. So in the following April, we had our last chapter assembly. It was great.
And that was a very vibrant chapter.
Yes.
Yeah, so as you spread out, you enlivened other chapters by your presence, by the presence of the women from the Mid-Atlantic.
Good to hear.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, I think we had a concentration of that. Every chapter always had that. Every chapter always had that.
Yeah.
And I think that's, the Mid-Atlantic had a reputation, but every chapter had what we had, just not in the same proportion.
And the larger chapters had a segment that had reputations.
Yeah, well, did they really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so that's interesting. So when you left, leadership in the capacity with the congregation, what else did you do? Where else were you called?
Well, I had
Did she call you?
Yes, she did. I had a sabbatical. I was given a sabbatical, and about 3 months into sabbatical, I got a call saying, wouldn't you like to be the project coordinator for this new thing called Gathering for Mission, which was a project of the Catholic Committee of the South. Catholic Committee of the South is a network, never had any money, never raised money, because it was just a network of folks who would gather once a year to talk about the issues in their communities and celebrate the victories that were taking place. So I said, I'm on sabbatical. I'm not going to do anything. I'm certainly not going into another full-time job now. But back then, so I started just doing a little bit. The suggestion was, well, just organize it for us. So I started doing some part-time stuff with them, and then moved full-time into it after my sabbatical was over. And am now project coordinator of Gathering for Mission, which is to engage church leadership on all levels with the voice and vision of Pope Francis. So we do days of dialogue. And then I got asked to be the interim director at the Aquinas Center of Theology at Emory University, so I'm doing both things right now.
Okay. What do you do for fun?
I love to read. I'm in the church choir. I love to sing.
That's right, you're a singer.
So I'm in the choir. That's a lot. That I do that for fun, and I like to walk. However, I
know
broke
you
my
do.
foot.
I know,
So
I
right
noticed
now
that.
I'm hobbling around with
Yeah.
a broken foot. But once that gets back, I'll walk and I listen to.
Well, exercise on the rest of your body. I know that was
I do that.
Yeah.
On crutches.
Yeah, yeah. When I broke mine, they said you can have crutches or a walker. And I thought, I didn't want a walker because I thought that would look like I was old.
Oh, lady, yes.
So, but I couldn't use the crutches. I couldn't maneuver them. But
Well, I started
Yeah.
when I was 18.
oh, that's
In
right.
that car
That's
accident,
right.
I learned
That's
how to
right.
use crutches, and
That's
it's like
right.
riding a bike.
That's right. That's a very good. How would you like to be remembered?
You know, it was interesting. During this Jubilee celebration, we were asked, what wisdom would you like to give to the younger,
Okay.
newer members? And so, I said, I love that passage from Mark in that regard, as you don't leave father and mother and sisters and homes and whatever without receiving again father and mother and sisters and, household 100-fold
Right.
with persecution.
Oh.
So it's been great. I've met so many people and learned so much and been engaged with so many wonderful things that I like to be remembered as someone who is a joyful Dominican
Yes.
preacher,
Yes,
and
you are.
one who has lived to the full. Lived to the full.
And you have, and you certainly have graced by your presence our congregation. And no matter what, you come back as a joyful, special woman.
Thank you.
And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Patty.
Thanks, Mary.
All right.